Hi, Misha here, and this is my continuing look at the U.S. Air Force's so-called Century series of jets from the 1950s, 60s. Of course, we began with the Super Sabre, which was a fighter-bomber. Then we looked at the F-101 Voodoo, which was something. As I said in that video, it was kind of it had many roles in its life, and it considered for many other jobs. And one of those jobs was not a replacement or an alternative to this one here, but a interim stopgap temporary measure for this one. This is the F-102 Delta Dagger, and it's actually from a company we don't hear a lot about, Convair. Much like with the 101, this one has a very colorful history, especially for how briefly it was actually used. Well, in 1948, if you remember, I said in the Voodoo video, in 46 the Air Force wanted a new escort for its bombers. Well, in 48 they wanted a new interceptor to intercept Russian bombers. Russia had just detonated a nuke, they were concerned, so on and so forth. 49, this idea was approved, and it was basically called the Ultimate Interceptor Program, 1954, because the idea was by 1954 they would have their ultimate interceptor into service. And they didn't actually start with the aircraft, the airframe. They started with the weapons control system, the weapons guidance system, targeting management, all of that. And several companies submitted plans, ideas, and it came down to a system from North American of F-86 fame and from Hughes Aviation, Hughes Aircraft. And in 1950, the Air Force went with the Hughes plan. And after the weapons system was more or less nailed down, at least they knew what they wanted. They hadn't made final selections yet, but yeah, in the middle of 1950, they started to work on the airframe, and they put out requirements, requests, and initially 6 companies responded in early 51 with, drawings, ideas. This got pared down to Convair and Lockheed. But really what it boils down to is, in the end, Convair was the only one left interested in standing. So they got the contract. They went to work, and in October of 53, the first prototype flew. And it was an astounding and amazing, just, blew them away with how underwhelming and, quite frankly, shitty it was. It wasn't even able to reach the sound barrier, much less break it. It got close, but it didn't pass. And it only could get up to about 23,000 feet. Speed, climb, all that was just all terribly underwhelming. So, yeah. And on the weapons systems front, the Hughes, it was experiencing some delays too, although since it was started earlier, not, it was further along. So 54 they had to rework. Convair had to change things up, and they came out with the F-102A prototype, and they used that aerial ruling that was real popular back then. They gave the fuselage a kind of a wasp waist. They also lengthened it a bit. They gave the canopy a much more angular appearance for better aerodynamics. They improved the engine. They expanded the wings out a bit. You get the idea. It's also worth pointing out that that first prototype that flew in 53 was destroyed like a week later. And the second prototype flew in early 54. It didn't really do a lot better. Again, they went back to the drawing board, did all this. And then the 102A was tried out, and it was acceptable. I don't think they were blown away, but by this point they were over schedule, over budget, and they just wanted the plane in the air, and it was meeting the minimum requirements. So, these were ordered into production, and they started to see service in 1956. So what do we have here? This is a long airplane, just a little bit longer than the 101 Voodoo, at 68 feet, tip to tip. It has a relatively short wingspan though, at about 38 feet. Single engine, as you see. It was the Air Force's first production successful Delta wing, with the very unique tail that you don't see on many American craft. It was technically the Air Force's first supersonic interceptor, although it really only could get up to about Mach 1.2, 1.25. So quite a bit slower than that Voodoo there. Also, its altitude wasn't great. It could get up to about 53,000 feet. So, an improvement, but not, I don't think, the leap forward. Definitely not what I think anyone was defining as the ultimate. But where it did excel, at least over planes of that era, was its weapons control system. And how much was automated for that time. It carried 6 AIM Falcon missiles. It was basically meant to zoom up and strike bombers or enemy airplanes and then come back down. And here is the one thing I like about how Hobby Master did this model. The weapons are all in a block. Instead of making you peg each individual one in, it had a giant bomb bay under the nose, well, not exactly under the nose, but close to it. Just one bay would open up and exposing 6 missiles. These usually fired in pairs. And then would close back up for aerodynamics. That was the plane's main armament. That bomb bay is so nervous about knocking stuff over, if you can't tell. You would be too in my position, I think. Yeah, the bay is right under here, and it folds up very flush. It also can be fitted with unguided rockets in the doors of the bay. I think up to 24 little rockets if needed. That was kind of a backup to hit bombers with. It's kind of the alternative to having a gun. There was no cannon on board here. Again, because it was an Interceptor. Yeah, I think I'm going to need to put like some sticky surface on this. Still kind of working out this thing a bit, but I hope it gives you a little better view if I can rotate it. It's a very heavy model too for how chunky it is. So geometrically, this is a very interesting plane. It does not look like a normal jet, and I think that was part of its allure. It had issues early on. A lot of them were never really worked out. In fact, they had an upgraded version with a lot of changes known as the F-102B, at least that's what Convair wanted to call it. But enough changes had been made that it ended up as the F-106 Delta Dart. I do not have a model of one of those yet, so I'll save the Delta Dart for a different day when I maybe find one. But reasonably ambitious project, but it just never really lived up. So really the one area where it excelled over the Voodoo was with its weapons. Thought I would open up the canopy for you. This is another one of the Hobby Masters that actually hinges. I don't know, I like the cockpit on this one. Reminds me a lot of the F-117. How angular and whatnot it is. Anyway. In service, pilots nicknamed this the Duece. Now, we could say it's because it was the F-102. Or we could say that they thought it was analogous to a turd. Whichever. It really wasn't that bad of a plane. It was just typical government overspending and all that. I shouldn't say. The 102 actually did see service in Vietnam. These were sent over in 1962, so a little bit after the 100 and 101. They were used as bomber escorts, as well as fighter patrol planes. Not exactly what they were designed for, but pretty close. They did pretty well. As far as I can remember, only one of these was ever shot down by a MiG-21 as it happens. Of course, others were lost to ground fire and accidents and other things. I mean, when you're having a war theater thing, you know, shit happens. These weren't in theater all that long. They were pulled out pretty early on, by the mid-60s in a lot of places, and the last ones left in 1968, and that's about the same time the Air Force retired them. Of course, they were being replaced by the F-106, so it's not like they went completely out of service. So this one's relatively short service life is a little misleading. The Air National Guard would keep these around a little longer, till about 1978, 1979, and then also retire them out. All told, 1,000 Delta Daggers were built. So, a little more than the 101 Voodoo. And it did see combat. As for the Hobby Master model itself, as much as the plane wasn't great, this is a cool model. The very simple Delta wing is neat. Gives it a very simple, sturdy. It's got a lot of kind of like flaring on the edges. As like I said, the cockpit is neat. The bomb bay, how you can plug it in, open or closed, is simple but effective. Got a big old engine in the back. Of course, landing gear up or down. It also comes with optional fuel tanks, just like that 101 Voodoo in the last video. But I like the sleek look without, so I don't have them plugged in. It's one of the heaviest Hobby Masters because it's all metal. It's very little plastic on this thing. It's just a chunk of metal, which just makes it feel good. It makes it feel like you're getting your value. So it is a neat model. Like the other Century series, I don't believe these are really much in production. Although I think you can still find 102s here and there occasionally. But if you want one, probably something to pick up pretty soon. Because I'm sure like the 100, they will disappear quickly. I mean, the 106 is already gone. I can't even find one. So, but I am happy with my 102. That's for sure. If I only was going to have one, I would have the 102. Because this actually saw combat. This particular paint scheme, while it's very, very similar to the one used in East Asia, is actually from the Hellenic Air Force, so Greece. Funnily enough, both Greece and Turkey used American jets during their dispute over the island of Cyprus. So it is possible 102s could have gone up against each other, or at least against other Century Series fighters. Kind of a fun little fact there. Alrighty folks, that's about all I can ramble on about this one. Any questions or comments, as always, love to hear them below. If you could, like, share, and subscribe. Also check out some of my other videos. And as I remind you, if you like a model too, I recommend Pete's Collectibles, and if you use Misha, M-I-S-H-A, as a promo code, you'll get 15% off plus reduced or free shipping. So not a bad deal, all things considered. And I can attest firsthand that the customer service is great, and he's for a small business especially, he's a really fast shipper. Like, I think I ordered this on a Wednesday night, like 8 p.m., and it was in the mail the next day, Thursday. So, that's cool. Appreciate you tuning in always, guys. And we'll finish up with the Century series very soon. We're getting actually to two pretty cool ones, the Starfighter and the Thud, very soon. I'll catch you then.